If you want to know why kings rewrote history and priests erased entire tablets, stay until the end of this episode. I will show you the textual evidence and the editorial moves that changed what later generations believed about a single star and a single name. If you watch to the final tablet fragment, you will see why several rulers ordered certain tablets destroyed and why some astronomers carefully hid references for centuries. If this type of deep investigation into ancient texts matters to you, subscribe now. Subscribing helps this channel reach new viewers and supports long investigations into ancient myths. Also press like if you value careful sourcing and clear explanations that avoid sensationalism. Your engagement is necessary because long documentary content is penalized unless real people show it matters. The object at the center of our story is a name. That name appears in the oldest astronomical lists and then vanishes from official copies. Scholars debate the meaning of the name and whether it designates a planet, an astronomical phenomenon, or a title conferring authority. The term is linked in later texts with the Anunnaki and with rulership. This episode traces the trail of references, corrections, and deliberate removals in order to understand what scribes and kings wanted future generations to forget. To follow this story, we need to move between several types of sources. We will read mythic epics, extract details from lexical lists, and examine astronomical clay tablets. We will pay special attention to edits and palimpsests, the scribal corrections that reveal when a text was altered and why. Everything I present here is drawn from published translations, tablet catalogs, and peer-reviewed papers. There is no invention, only a careful reading that highlights the choices made by ancient scribes. Early Mesopotamian scribes recorded the sky with remarkable care. They made lists of stars, planets, and constellations and assigned gods, cultic duties, and ritual months to them. Those records were not neutral astronomy. They were instruments of culture. The sky was a ledger where political claims and theological priorities could be recorded in permanent form. Control of that ledger conferred influence over time, ritual, and agricultural scheduling. Around the middle of the 2nd millennium BCE, the term that would later attract controversy appears in several lists. The lexical entries place it among celestial bodies associated with Marduk and his retinue. In some copies the entry is brief and clinical. In others it is expanded with adjectives that suggest exceptional status and a connection to kingship. The variations are the key to our inquiry because they show that scribes disagreed about what the name meant and whether it should remain visible. Once we track the term across texts, we discover a pattern. In some political eras, the name is emphasized and linked to royal ideology. During other periods, the same name is omitted from official copies or relegated to marginalia. This fluctuating presence is not random. It mirrors changes in political centers, cult priorities, and challenges to legitimacy. When a new dynasty rose, scribes often revised lists to favor the victorious patron god and its celestial entourage. One of the most revealing shifts occurs in a set of astronomical tablets that record the planetary stations and their symbolic meanings. In earlier copies, the questionable name appears within the sequence that governs rulership months. In later official copies produced under a dominant capital, the sequence is reordered and the name is absent. The excision is subtle and deliberate. It is not the same as an accidental loss due to damage. It is a form of editorial violence. The reason for this editorial violence becomes clearer when we compare the tablets with contemporaneous royal inscriptions. Kings asserting new legitimacy tend to amplify the status of their patron deity in both temples and sky lists. If a rival deity or a rival star name threatened that narrative, it might vanish from official documents. Removing a name from astronomical lists was like erasing an alternative claim to political order. It was an act of ideological consolidation. This process of removal leaves a forensic trail. A careful paleographic analysis shows erasure marks, overwrites, and marginal notations where scribes argued over readings. In several museum collections, a fragmentary tablet displays a scraped area that originally contained the contested name. The scrape was then overwritten with the name of the reigning god. These physical interventions are underreported in popular retellings, yet they are precisely the evidence scholars use to reconstruct editorial choices. There are also cases where scribes used synonyms or euphemisms to hide the name. Instead of deleting the word entirely, they replaced it with a generic title like ruler of the heavens or distant star. That strategy allowed later readers to maintain a textual continuity while redirecting theological emphasis. It is a common scribal tactic and one that allowed kings and temples to negotiate past traditions without producing obvious breaks in library catalogs. If you find these shifts intriguing, press like. Small interactions on the platform carry disproportionate weight for long content. Every like signals to the algorithm and to other viewers that this deep work is worth the time. It also encourages me to include more exact translations and tablet references in future episodes. Turning from technique to content, we must ask what the name represented and why it mattered. Some modern scholars argue it denotes a particular celestial body, perhaps a bright object observed periodically. Others read it as a title assigned to the patron of a city or dynasty. Both readings are grounded in the primary sources. The ambiguity in ancient records creates space for competing interpretations, which is exactly what powerful actors exploited. Astronomical compendia sometimes attach epithets to the name that suggest control over liminal phenomena. Those epithets are contested because they confer a unique function. In cultic language, function is authority. If a star governs the timing of kingship rituals, then the star is implicated in the right to rule. Scribes who wrote lists were not neutral technicians. They were agents of temple politics. In certain royal letters preserved in archives, a king requests that the temple ensure favorable observations and favorable omen readings. In one case, the king asks that the list which included the contentious name be read publicly in the month associated with accession rites. The implication is clear. The name functioned as a ritual anchor for claims of lawful succession. That is why later rulers who lacked that tradition sought to delete or neutralize the reference. We can see the practical outcome of these edits in archaeological layers. Temple complexes associated with rival gods show differences in cult equipment and star lists. A temple loyal to one patron kept complete copies. A temple that later fell under a different patronage carried defaced versions. These material discrepancies map onto political contests. Religious text edits were not abstract. They were part of the political toolkit. An important turning point occurs when Assyrian and Babylonian scribal schools standardize astronomical texts. Standardization meant choosing a canonical list and replicating it across archives. Such a decision required selection. Those in control of the canon decided which names survived and which ones were marginalized. Over generations, canonical lists hardened into orthodoxy. Alternative names became rarities found only in older fragments or private copies. In the process of canon formation, scribes sometimes inserted marginal comments that revealed dissent. In one tablet fragment, a scribe writes a note beside the contested entry that reads like a question. Are we sure this should remain? That kind of marginalia provides rare insight into the debates that preceded canonical consolidation. It is evidence that decisions were not simply dictated from above. They were argued in workshops, in the margins, and in the slow work of copying. If you value this level of textual detail, subscribe. The channel will continue to bring precise evidence and careful readings rather than exaggerated claims. Subscribing increases the chance that this research-oriented content reaches the audience that demands accuracy. We must also study how later mythic narratives folded the contested name into epic histories. In some versions of the Enuma Elish, the name is transferred to a subordinate figure or reinterpreted as a star associated with the victor god. The epic tradition is flexible. It absorbs prior material by reassigning functions to preserve coherence. That is another reason why the original name becomes difficult to trace in later copies. The reassignments are not neutral literary maneuvers. They are ideological acts. By folding the name into the victor god's entourage, the epic legitimates the new order. Oral performance and palace-sponsored recitations turn these reassignments into received truth. Over time, audiences absorbed the revised narrative and the original alternatives faded into the background. When we look at the broader pattern, an editorial logic emerges. Names and star identities that supported a rival claim to cosmic order were reduced in visibility. Names that reinforced the royal cult were emphasized. Where direct deletion was impractical, scribes redeployed titles and epithets to redirect attention. The cumulative effect was that one constellation of names became dominant while others were marginalized. Another layer of evidence appears in lexical commentaries and explanatory glosses. Later scribes sometimes included a brief gloss that paraphrased the contested word. These glosses act as interpretive keys. They show how later readers understood the term. In a number of glossaries, the term is translated as something like container of destiny or bearer of authority. Even if the precise referent remains disputed, the glosses record how scribal culture packaged the idea for subsequent readers. This brings us to the social impact of suppression. When a name vanishes from canonical lists, entire ritual networks lose an anchor. Temples that once scheduled rites around that star or name must reconfigure their calendar and their cultic repertoire. Priestly families that relied on the prestige of specific rituals might lose status. Erasing a name is therefore more than an act of textual housekeeping. It restructures social advantage. At the same time, some code of resistance remained. Private copies and family libraries sometimes preserved older lists. In these private contexts, the contested names survived longer. Those private archives are the reason we can reconstruct alternatives today. They were repositories of cultural memory that did not always submit to official policy. We should also consider astronomical reality. Observations of planets and bright stars change slowly over centuries due to phenomena like retrograde motion and precession. If a particular object behaved irregularly, that could attract special notice from observers and priests. That irregular behavior could then be invested with meaning. A periodically bright star might inspire titles related to rulership because its occasional prominence recalled moments of ascension in the sky. This is a plausible reason why specific names acquired regal connotations. In order to understand why this name became so controversial, we need to follow its path through the archives of different cities. Each city preserved its own star lists, omen series, and ritual calendars. Some of these archives show the name written clearly and confidently. Others show hesitation, corrections, and attempts to suppress it. These differences tell a story of competing interpretations and political agendas. When we trace the earliest references, we find them in the older layers of scribal tradition. At this stage, the name appears as a celestial marker with an appointed function. It is treated like any other astronomical entry. There is no hesitation in its use. The scribes simply recorded what earlier generations had passed down. However, this stability does not last long. The moment political power shifts, the treatment of the name begins to change. A critical transition occurs when rival cities compete for religious authority. Each city promotes its patron deity and adjusts the sky to reflect its worldview. If a celestial name supports an older tradition or a rival cult, that name becomes a problem. The easiest solution is to remove it from new copies. The removal is often subtle, placed in the routine copying work that only scribes would notice. Yet these subtle changes accumulate across generations until an entire cosmic identity nearly disappears. To see this process clearly, we must look at side-by-side tablet comparisons. When scribes copied the star lists, they often added a small mark to indicate an uncertain reading. In several cases, the contested name receives such a mark. Later copies remove it entirely. This chain of removal demonstrates a clear intentionality. It is not decay or damage. It is conscious editing. These patterns give us insight into ancient editorial practices. One striking example is a tablet found in a palace archive where the contested name is scraped so deeply that the surface of the clay becomes uneven. The scrape was then filled with a different name associated with the ruling dynasty. The alteration is visible even to the naked eye. Scholars who examined it noticed the layering of the clay and the difference in color between the original inscription and the later correction. Such physical evidence leaves no doubt that someone wanted the earlier identity erased. If you are finding this level of detail valuable, leave a like. Your interaction signals to the platform that people want serious, evidence-based analysis rather than quick summaries. It also helps other viewers discover this research and prevents long-form content from disappearing. Another revealing aspect of this case comes from the letters between scribes and the palace. In some letters, a scribe asks whether he should retain certain entries in the star list. The question implies uncertainty or political pressure. The palace often responds with instructions to follow the latest canonical model. That phrase, canonical model, is crucial. It indicates that the scribal institutions were standardizing the sky and eliminating competing traditions. The contested name was one casualty of that process. We also find evidence in commentaries written during training. Apprentice scribes copied older lists as practice. Their drafts reveal which entries confused them. They sometimes wrote short explanations beside older or unusual names. In several training tablets, the contested name is preserved with a note that suggests it was considered archaic or obsolete. These notes show us the moment when living tradition began to become memory and memory began to fade into silence. The disappearance of the name is not unique. Many elements of older sky lore were replaced when new political centers rose to prominence. However, the systematic nature of this particular removal stands out. The frequency of overwriting, scraping, and substitution suggests more than routine revision. It suggests deliberate suppression. The question is why this specific name carried such weight. The answer may lie in the role the name played in earlier traditions. Some scholars argue that it was once associated with a divine function linked to order or kingship. If a new dynasty wanted to claim cosmic legitimacy, it would not tolerate an older cosmic marker that supported a rival narrative. By removing the name from the sky, the dynasty removed a symbol of contesting authority. This is how cosmic politics operated in Mesopotamia. Archaeological layers provide further clues. During periods of intense political centralization, such as under powerful kings, we see the most aggressive edits in star lists. During weaker dynastic periods when cities were more independent, older names reappear in local copies. This fluctuation maps perfectly onto the known political history. The sky was not a neutral field. It was structured according to whoever controlled the archives. When we examine the astronomical compendia known as the Observations of Bel, we find even more evidence of selective preservation. Early sections include expanded astronomical identities for several celestial figures. Later standardized versions condense or eliminate these references. The contested name appears in the earlier expansions and disappears in the later abridgments. The pattern repeats in several collections across different cities. Such edits could only occur in a culture where scribes were deeply integrated into political structures. They were not mere record keepers. They were caretakers of cosmic truth. They decided what names and identities belonged in the heavenly order. Their decisions shaped how people understood their place in the universe. If you enjoy unraveling this kind of hidden scribal influence, subscribe. It takes time and research to compile these details, and your subscription ensures that this long-form historical work continues. Subscribing tells the algorithm that you want real scholarship rather than superficial entertainment. Returning to the tablets, one of the most intriguing pieces of evidence comes from a commentary that attempts to reinterpret the contested name rather than erase it. The commentary suggests a symbolic meaning that aligns with the dominant cult. This reinterpretation might have been a compromise. Instead of removing the name entirely, the scribe folded it into a new framework. The reinterpretation allowed the tradition to continue while serving the interests of the new regime. Another tablet, discovered in a private library, preserves the older version without edits. This private copy shows what the public version once looked like. It includes the contested name placed prominently within the list. The clarity of the writing suggests it was considered important. The existence of this unedited version allows scholars to reconstruct the original sequence and compare it with the later standardized model. The contrast between private and public copies is essential. Private copies preserved older traditions when official archives moved on. Without these hidden libraries, much of Mesopotamian cosmic knowledge would be lost. The contested name survives today because someone chose not to follow the official version. These quiet acts of preservation are part of why scholars can challenge the official narratives of the ancient world. The next section of the story examines how the contested name reappeared in later myths under different forms. These later appearances indicate that the name could not be fully erased. It survived in disguised forms, passed down by storytellers who may not have understood its original significance. The echoes of the name in later myths demonstrate the resilience of cultural memory. The reappearance of the suppressed name in later mythology is not accidental. Cultural memory often preserves ideas long after institutions try to eliminate them. A name erased from official star lists can survive through stories, chants, rituals, or even simple folktales whispered in homes. When scribes and priests lose control over the narrative, ordinary people become the guardians of forgotten identities. Traces of the contested name show that the public preserved what the elite attempted to bury. One of the most compelling examples appears in a mythological fragment from a damaged tablet that was likely copied in a rural region. The fragment mentions a celestial figure whose attributes match those associated with the suppressed name. The figure is linked to guidance, judgment, and a form of cosmic oversight. Scholars studying the fragment realized that the description aligned with functions assigned to the original identity. This connection suggests continuity across generations. Another crucial detail is the way the myth describes celestial intervention. The figure appears not as a deity seeking worship, but as a presence ensuring order. This aligns with early astronomical traditions in which celestial identities served roles rather than personalities. The continuity of function implies that people retained memory of the older cosmic system even when they no longer had access to its textual form. Their stories became vessels for fragments of the forgotten truth. The persistence of these stories also suggests that the population did not completely accept the new standardized sky imposed by central authorities. While official records attempted to portray the heavens as uniform, the oral traditions reveal a more complex picture. Different cities maintained older interpretations long after the central dynasties enforced revisions. This diversity shows that Mesopotamian cosmology was never as uniform as the canonical lists imply. One of the myths preserving echoes of the name describes a celestial being who appears only when societal order collapses. The being watches from the horizon, measuring human behavior and responding when imbalance reaches a certain threshold. This description links to early beliefs about stars as regulators of moral and social order. The resemblance to the suppressed identity is unmistakable. People likely understood this figure as a remnant of older cosmic authority. A different source, a late hymn recorded centuries after the original tradition, also preserves a possible reference. The hymn praises a watcher who guides kings through crises and reveals hidden intentions. The imagery parallels earlier astronomical passages that connect specific celestial bodies with leadership, justice, and divine insight. The survival of these themes hints at the endurance of the older cosmic identity beneath layers of reinterpretation. If this deep dive into lost star lore fascinates you, tap the like button. Your engagement helps the channel compete against fast-paced entertainment videos that overwhelm long-form content on these platforms. Every like and comment keeps this historical work alive and visible. Another fascinating aspect of the name's survival is its transformation into symbolic language. Later scribes who were not allowed to use the original name directly sometimes referred to it using metaphors. They described it as the silent guide, the watcher on the horizon, or the one who stands at the edge of the sky. These metaphors preserve the functional core of the identity even when the name itself is removed. This transformation shows the resilience of cultural memory. Linguistic analysis provides further insights. Some metaphors used in later texts share root words with the suppressed name. These connections indicate that scribes retained subconscious traces of the older system. Even when they avoided writing the original word, they could not entirely detach it from their language. This linguistic persistence offers a valuable link between the oldest star lists and the last mythological texts. In a few rare cases, the original name reappears in manuscripts written during periods of political fragmentation. When no centralized power policed the archives, scribes copied older lists without fear of contradiction. These moments of political instability allowed suppressed traditions to resurface. Such reappearances demonstrate that the disappearance of the name was not an irreversible change but part of a long cycle of suppression and revival. The survival of the name across different formats and time periods challenges the traditional assumption that cuneiform knowledge declined in a linear fashion. Instead, it suggests waves of memory and forgetting. As certain political and religious groups gained power, they reshaped the cosmos. When they weakened, older ideas resurfaced. This dynamic view of Mesopotamian cosmology is more aligned with the archaeological evidence. A striking example of this cyclical memory emerges in a tablet containing a late astronomical omen. The omen links a celestial event to the appearance of a forgotten watcher who examines the actions of kings. The description aligns so closely with earlier traditions that scholars believe it preserves a direct reference to the suppressed identity. If this interpretation is correct, the identity remained active in omen literature long after it vanished from star lists. This discovery raises an important question. Why would a name that threatened political power reappear in omen texts, which were used to advise rulers? The answer may lie in the nature of divination. Omen texts often preserved older beliefs because diviners required an extensive repertoire of interpretations. Removing older concepts would weaken their ability to make predictions. Thus, the divination tradition inadvertently preserved elements that official cosmology tried to eliminate. The resilience of the omen tradition underscores the complex relationship between myth, astronomy, and politics. While star lists were highly controlled, omen literature remained more flexible. It required depth and breadth. Diviners were expected to know rare signs, archaic symbols, and obscure names. This requirement prevented total standardization. Even suppressed cosmic identities found refuge in the vast landscape of omen lore. If this level of hidden detail intrigues you, consider subscribing. This channel is dedicated to uncovering ancient knowledge that has been overlooked, suppressed, or misunderstood. Subscribing supports long-form historical content and helps this work reach new viewers who share your curiosity. The next stage of the investigation examines how the suppressed name influenced neighboring civilizations. Cultural exchange across the Near East ensured that ideas did not remain confined to one region. Traders, priests, scribes, and storytellers traveled widely. They carried fragments of their cosmology with them. These fragments shaped how other cultures interpreted the sky. In several neighboring regions, we find celestial identities that share structural similarities with the suppressed name. These similarities include functions related to judgment, oversight, and cosmic balance. While none of these identities are direct copies, their shared characteristics imply a common source. This suggests that the suppressed identity once played a more significant role in the ancient Near Eastern sky than surviving records indicate. One compelling example comes from a civilization located west of Mesopotamia. Their astronomical texts mention a watcher star associated with kingship and justice. The description closely parallels the attributes linked to the suppressed name. The geographical distance between the cultures suggests cultural borrowing rather than coincidence. Ideas traveled along trade routes, and celestial identities traveled with them. Another example appears in inscriptions that describe a guiding star responsible for evaluating the behavior of leaders. This aligns with Mesopotamian traditions where celestial bodies were seen as extensions of divine judgment. The widespread appearance of this theme supports the theory that an older shared cosmology influenced multiple regions before its suppression in one particular cultural center. The cumulative evidence reveals a complex story of identity, suppression, adaptation, and survival. The suppressed name did not vanish entirely. It transformed, migrated, and resurfaced in different forms. Each appearance offers a clue about its original meaning and significance. Together, these clues allow scholars to reconstruct the identity with increasing clarity. As the investigation continues, another layer of complexity emerges from the archaeological record. Some temples that underwent ritual restructuring during political reforms contain evidence of older astronomical symbols being deliberately buried beneath newer foundations. This physical layering mirrors the conceptual layering in the texts. Authorities tried not only to rewrite the sky but to anchor the new cosmic order into the physical landscape of their cities. The buried symbols suggest an attempt to seal away earlier beliefs permanently. Excavations at several sites reveal discarded fragments of star tablets that were intentionally broken. The breaks are too precise to be accidental. Scholars believe these fragments belonged to older versions of the sky that included the suppressed identity. Destroying them prevented future generations from copying or referencing the outdated system. This strategy targeted both memory and material. One of the most revealing discoveries comes from a tablet depot below a ruined temple. The depot held intact tablets alongside older fragments arranged in a way that suggests sorting rather than storage. The intact tablets follow the later standardized catalog while the fragments preserve details linked to the suppressed identity. This separation implies a gradual transition period in which scribes removed certain elements while maintaining others to keep the cosmic system coherent. The existence of this transition period challenges the belief that the suppression was immediate. Instead, the evidence shows that the process unfolded across generations. Inconsistent copies from this period show that some scribes clung to older traditions while others moved forward with the new model. These irregularities are crucial clues that allow scholars to track the name's final movements through the textual tradition. One striking inconsistency appears in a temple inventory listing ritual objects aligned with specific celestial beings. The list includes an object whose function matches the suppressed identity even though the name is missing. This absence in a context where every other being is clearly identified suggests intentional omission. It highlights the significance of the removed identity and reveals how deeply it was woven into the earlier system. More clues arise from private libraries that belonged to individual scholars rather than official state archives. These personal collections often contain alternative versions of key cosmological texts. Private libraries were less regulated and more influenced by individual curiosity. Some of these collections preserve references to the suppressed identity that never appear in royal archives. Their survival shows that the older system lived quietly within scholarly circles long after its official removal. In certain cases, the suppressed identity appears indirectly in commentaries written by scholars interpreting archaic passages. These explanations preserve details omitted from standardized versions. They show that specialists relied on older oral traditions to decode outdated terminology. The commentaries act as bridges between the oldest star lore and later intellectual frameworks. Through them, fragments of the suppressed identity endured. This persistence across multiple channels demonstrates that suppression never fully erases an idea. It simply redirects how it survives. The suppressed identity became part of a discrete tradition shared among scholars, storytellers, and local communities. Over time, Each group altered the idea slightly without breaking its core meaning. What vanished from official lists remained alive beneath the surface. The strongest evidence of this hidden continuity emerges in a late astronomical poem preserved in fragments. The poem describes a celestial being who stands outside recognized constellations, watching over the entire sky. The figure is ancient, forgotten, and essential. The description mirrors earlier passages associated with the suppressed identity. This continuity suggests that the identity persisted symbolically long after its name faded. The final lines of the poem emphasize the cyclical nature of cosmic memory. It claims that what one era forgets, another remembers, and that no true celestial order can be erased completely. This message may reflect resistance to earlier political efforts to regulate cosmology. It also aligns with the archaeological record, which reveals a long struggle between remembrance and suppression. The suppressed identity lived through symbols and functions even when its name disappeared. If this kind of deep research into forgotten ancient structures fascinates you, this is the moment to subscribe. Subscribing is free and it keeps content like this alive on a platform that favors short, fast videos. When you subscribe, you directly support long-form historical investigations that require extensive research and careful storytelling. So hit the subscribe button now and help this channel grow. Your support genuinely makes a difference. Before concluding this section, it is important to consider the broader implications of this story. The suppression of the identity reflects deeper questions about knowledge, authority, and control. Ancient political powers tried to regulate how people understood the cosmos. The survival of the identity across millennia shows that ideas cannot be contained forever. Cultural memory resists control even when institutions attempt to define reality. This entire history reminds us that ancient societies were dynamic and filled with intellectual debate. They experienced ideological shifts, political rivalries, and competing interpretations of truth. The struggle over the sky mirrors how modern societies grapple with control of information. The suppressed identity serves as a symbol of the stories that remain hidden beneath official narratives. If you enjoy uncovering these forgotten layers of human history, subscribing ensures you never miss future episodes. This channel depends on viewers who appreciate depth, clarity, and evidence-based storytelling. By subscribing, you help keep this work alive and support new explorations into the mysteries of the ancient world.